An unprecedented new consciousness is transforming the entire human species. A new world is being born. The old world is disintegrating. Both worlds now call to you. Do you want to live in gratitude, patience, contentment, and awe of the universe? Or in anger, worry, overwhelm, and despair? This podcast will help you choose joyfully and effectively. Welcome. A participant at one of our events asked me when I first began to notice that I was multisensory. In this soul snack, I talk about my growing awareness of multisensory perception, and it goes back farther than I thought. It goes back to my awareness as a feeling of being a victim, addiction to sex, and the miracles that led to the writing of my first book, The Dancing Woolly Masters, and the unexpected things that created in my life. To answer your question, it's hard for me to say, where did something start? You know, I grew up in Kansas. I can look back in retrospect and see that I was multisensory. I never knew that term. I never knew what it meant. I didn't have the slightest interest or knowledge of any of this. But I did hear my grandmother speaking to me after she died, and we had a good time. So that sort of was my first clue. And I wouldn't tell my folks about it because they'd think that I was hallucinating or couldn't, in denial that she'd passed on. But she didn't pass on. She was there. So I think the best way to start my answer is with the Dancing Woolly Masters. Because until then, my life was all for me. It was all scam for me, me, me.
In other words, frightened parts of your personality controlled you.
Precisely. And so it was a life of motorcycles, smoking Marlboros, doing drugs, addiction to sex. And I thought I was manly. When you're inside a hell, sometimes it doesn't look like that, but you're drawn to it magnetically. And so I wasn't aware enough of myself to know how out of control and painful my life was. It was so painful that just having sex was one of the few pleasurable things in this otherwise bleak environment. And I needed my motorcycle to feel good about who I was, just like I needed my Green Beret before that. I was emotionally violent. I was jealous. I was feeling a victim. And then I went to this meeting of physicists I got invited to at the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory, and I was amazed at what they were talking about and that I could understand them because they weren't talking in quantitative or formulaic terms. They weren't talking mathematically. They were talking in concepts. And the question they were discussing that day was, are we creating the reality that we're experimenting with? Subatomic particles. And that captivated me. I couldn't believe that these were professional physicists, and some very notable ones at that were discussing that question. And I went home and my mind was sparking. It was like I had 3 cups of cappuccino. I could understand everything. Sparks were coming off my fingertips, and I couldn't reproduce a word of what they said. Not a word. I couldn't tell anybody why I was so excited, so I started to learn more, and I went back every Friday again and again. They were gracious enough to allow me to come back and listen. And I started reading until I could begin to grasp some of the ideas that were so exciting to me and that I couldn't articulate, like complementarity and the uncertainty principle and wave function. And then, as I began to understand that, the idea came to me at a meeting at a New Age place in California called Esalen. I'm going to write a book about what I'm discovering, and I'm going to leave it behind me for people who are going to come afterwards with an interest in physics, and people who are liberal arts majors, not science majors, and people who don't care about science, don't like science, maybe and have a repulsion for science, but they want to know what quantum physics is. So I started to write. And it was in that process that something really changed. When I wasn't writing, I was always either looking for sex or terrified that the monthly miracle of the rent wasn't going to happen this month. when I was writing, I forgot all of that. I would wake up wanting to be with the book, thinking about the book, going to the used bookstores in Berkeley, experiencing synchronicity in what I found and what I didn't find. And while I was writing this book, which became The Dancing Wu Li Masters, I would start by listing all of the things that I wanted to have in a chapter, and I'd create an outline, and I'd start to write on the outline. But pretty soon, usually, I'd get interested in something else. The energy would go elsewhere, and I'd go elsewhere with it, and I'd leave the outline behind. After about 6 months, and the chapters were coming out about one a month, I began to realize these chapters were fitting together, as though I had planned them to fit together. But I didn't. I never stayed with an outline that I planned. So who was making them fit together? How was that happening? And I noticed some other things about this book. Number one, it was more comprehensive. It was more intelligent than I was. And the other thing that I couldn't help but notice was it was funnier than I was. I really enjoyed writing this book. So I'd write it for 5 or 6 days, and I'd be in that experience. And then for another 4 or 5 days, I would be looking for sex, a woman to exploit, worried about the rent, back on my motorcycle. And that's the way it went. And I began to see it was almost like A being a reality. Here's A, here's B, here's A, here's B. Well, the A was a whole lot more desirable than the B. The A was full of creativity and delight and joy and wanting to get up and wanting to get back to the project and the writing. And in that process, I began to realize that there was something more involved in the creation than me. I wasn't doing it alone. I wasn't a channel. It wasn't as simple as my closing my ideas and writing an American Book Award-winning book. I just type it out and I look at it and turn it in. It wasn't that at all. I had to put everything that I had into it. My intelligence, my ability to write, my love of language, which I didn't know I had at the time. Either one. But there was more. There was something more. And so I decided that I was going to give myself to this something more. I wanted it in my life. And I remember one of my friends was a Jungian psychologist, or she was studying it, and I told her what I was doing. She said, "Are you crazy? You don't know what forces are out there. You don't know what you're aligning yourself with." I felt a little sorry for her because she was so frightened, but I knew what I wanted to do, and I did. And I said, I want to make my life. I want to live my life the way this book is being written, which is spontaneously, intelligently, joyfully. And I've come a long way in that direction. But that was my first experience of authentic power. That's what it feels like. And it was I won't say it's my first experience of non-physical intelligence and compassion, because I've been my grandmother and some other examples like that. But it was the first time it was really meaningful to me. And I didn't know any of the things that I know now. So I would say that was the beginning. That was the beginning. It wasn't in a life of drugs and bikes and women and Marlboros and bars. Just couldn't hold a candle to what I was beginning to experience. I tried Coke once, and after I did, I was so disappointed because I realized this is what I feel like when I'm writing the book. It's exactly it. I'm very fortunate. I'm very blessed that I'm not addicted to cocaine, because some people do that once, like I did, and they spend the next decades trying to untangle their life. That didn't happen to me. I'm forever grateful. But it's just one of the experiences of realizing that there was more to my life. I don't want to get on a thin ice. I just want to say that may be the first time in my life when things changed in a big way. And the thing that changed was, before these experiences, I was doing everything for me. And while I was writing the book, I was writing it as a gift. As a gift. And it was the first gift I gave in my life. I was about 33 or 35. I'd never given a gift before. Everything was for me. That was a big change. Join me next time to explore the epic transformation of human consciousness that is reshaping our species. and your part in it. It may surprise you. I'm Gary Zukav.